All right, hello YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk metal. Lately some folks have been asking me when I'm going to get back around to talking some new wave of British heavy metal. I looked over my episode log from recent weeks, and they are right. It has been a while since we've gotten back to one of my favorite genres in the entire heavy metal underground. And so tonight I'm going to bring you four absolute stone cold killers from the entire new wave of British heavy metal movement. These are bands that were a little bit better, a little bit faster, a little bit raw, or a little bit more aggressive than a lot of their contemporaries. They were cranking it up to another level and laid down some of the best tracks from that entire musical movement. Without further ado, let's jump right in to our first act for the night, which is going to be Persian Risk from 1981 with a track called Calling for You. All right, there's a little bit of Persian Risk, Calling for You. Couldn't pick a better track to start out a night of some red hot new wave of British heavy metal action. Persian Risk is one of the criminally overlooked bands from the entire movement. They did get several vinyl items made over the years, but this is where it started in 1981 with a little self-released single. The band is noteworthy for having some name musicians in it. We have, for example, a young Phil Campbell who went on to make albums with some guy that you may have heard of. His name slips my mind right now, but if you're hardcore, you know who I'm talking about. Also, Carl Sentence would go on to perform with a lot of other bands and has played with even Nazareth in more recent years. Always strong musicianship, always very strong songwriting on all their releases. After this first single, which came out in 1981, the band did a second single for Neat Records that's still very good material, a little more polished sounding. Then they would, after that, to move on, make a 12-inch EP and eventually got a full-length album released as well. Although by the time the full length got out, their sound had kept gradually shifting to more and more accessible territory. The album is called Rise Up. It's still a fairly good album, as long as you're okay with that kind of a little bit more lighter commercial leaning sound. It's very good by those standards. It doesn't have the real catchy firepower of Calling for You or their earlier tracks, but I still like the album quite a bit. Unfortunately, it came a bit too late to really keep the band going. It also has a kind of ridiculous cover of a giant transparent guy lifting the world's largest dumbbell for reasons. But nevertheless, Persian Risk, lots of great tunes in their catalog, and it's a shame that they don't get mentioned more often when people are discussing great bands from that era. Most of their material is pretty easy to find for a reasonable price. The first single is definitely the hardest one to track down. It's one of those kind of mid-priced rarities. It's another one that's also hard to find with the picture sleeve in good condition. If it even has the sleeve, a lot of them are a bit beat up. So if you see a copy with a nice sleeve for a price that you like, snap it up. It's one of the real jewels of the new wave of British heavy metal, and you can't go wrong with Persian Risk. If you're wondering what the heck does Persian Risk mean, I have seen it quoted in Malcolm Macmillan's New Wave of British Heavy Metal Encyclopedia that apparently it was the name for one of the nuclear war scenarios when generals during the Cold War were, playing out different possible scenarios for how World War III could get started. There was a scenario that was codenamed Persian Risk. The band picked up on that, and personally, I think it's a pretty kick-ass name for a pretty kick-ass band. All right, let's keep moving right along. The second band is a little better known, and for good reason. They've done some good stuff over the years, and it all began with a recording session in 1982 that resulted in 2 tracks being laid down for a single on the Guardian label. I'm talking about Satan with Kiss of Death, and that's going to be the track we'll start off with here. Let's check out a little bit of Satan's Kiss of Death. All right, there's a little bit of the beginnings of Satan. This band has developed, a strong following over the years. They have successfully reunited and put out some albums in recent years that have been pretty highly regarded and well received by fans, both new and old. The single here features an early lineup of the band. This is before Brian Ross was on vocals. That's obviously not his voice. It's also before Ian Davidson Swift was on vocals. The vocalist back in these days was named Trev Robinson, I believe is his last name. And personally, he was my favorite of the Satan vocalists. I thought he did a very good job. He didn't leave a ton of recorded material. The band did a couple more songs during this session that ended up on compilation albums back in the day, such as the Roxcalibur compilation with the songs The Executioner, and they had one more, the title escapes my mind at the moment. But yeah, all 4 of those tracks from the Guardian recording session did see imprint on vinyl, and they're all excellent material. The original single on Guardian, like a lot of the stuff on Guardian, has gotten pretty collectible over the years, especially with the picture sleeve. It's a simple but effective picture sleeve design. I always thought it looked fairly cool. It's a hard one to track down in good condition with the sleeve. You can get a reissued version of the 7-inch single. It came out on the Buried by Time and Dust label several years ago when they did a 12-inch rendition of a lot of early Satan material. And it included like a bonus 7-inch with a replica of the picture sleeve. The label's obviously just redone. But yeah, Satan, of course, went on to do the classic Court and the Act, and they would soldier on even through the mid and into the later 1980s when they did various releases, famously getting kind of grimy and dirty on the covers of some of them as they got a bit more thrashy at times. But yeah, I really like the early Satan material. I think those first 4 tracks they recorded were a cut above a lot of what other new wave of British heavy metal bands were doing in terms of just, sheer aggression and fury. All right, so from a pretty well-known band with Satan, act number 3 for the night is going to be a much more obscure one from 1983, working under the somewhat odd name of JJ's Powerhouse. We're going to check out a little bit of this one for starters. It's a track called Running for the Line, and this one cranks just a little bit. Here we go.
Turn so fast, it's a top. I got him in my sight.
All right, so yeah, JJ's Powerhouse, absolutely smoking a little proto thrash metal in your new wave of British heavy metal there for you with Running for the Line. The flip side on this one, called Black Rods, is also a very heavy, grindy number. Not as fast, but very, very heavy riffage on it. This is Jaguar level of heaviness for a new wave of British heavy metal act. And by Jaguar level, I mean Power Games Jaguar, not this time Jaguar, because we don't need to go there. We're talking the good stuff tonight. I'm not going to talk about that second Jaguar album, not this time around. So yeah, the deal with JJ's Powerhouse, they actually had existed all the way back to 1976 in one form or another, most of the time working under the name of Quad. And apparently, reportedly had developed a pretty good following working through the punk years and then being well established as already having a lot of experience as the new wave of British heavy metal got going. But the lineup imploded at exactly the wrong time, and the band didn't really get any traction as heavy metal bands started to become all the rage at the dawn of the 1980s. So main man JJ Cox, as he was sort of looking for new pursuits with Quad not really able to get off the ground, ended up using a couple of the last songs recorded with Quad and pressed them up on a single and put the name JJ's Powerhouse on them. This band technically never really existed back in the day. There was no live performances by JJ's Powerhouse. There was no recording contract. It was just his way of like, I'm relocating. I'm going to want something to pass out to try to get some interest, show how I can apply my trade. And this is what he ended up making. So yeah, kind of a weird history. It's a shame that the band apparently were absolute barn burners, and yeah, they were dead in the water before they ever really even pressed up the single. Cox would go on and play with other projects and be associated with different bands, but the JJ's Powerhouse was, of course, just this one-off release that he had used to kind of help get his name out there and advertise what he was capable of as he looked for more bands and more projects. Once upon a time, this was one of those very, very unknown singles that came to notoriety when the New Wave of British Heavy Metal volume bootleg CDs series came out back in the 1990s. JJ's Powerhouse got an inclusion on the very last volume, volume number 8. And yeah, it's one of the strongest tracks on any of the volumes. I mean, you're really hearing roots of thrash metal style music on this single. At that point, everybody lost their minds and everybody had to have this single, and it became a very highly desirable one for quite a while. Eventually, a quantity of copies did turn up in dealers' hands, and as such, the asking price kind of came back down out of orbit a bit. And ever since, it's been, a reasonably priced single that for a long time, you'd see a copy of it on eBay, at least every few months. I think the supply has dried up a bit in more recent years. You don't see it quite as often, but still, it's not, one of these records that you have to pay hundreds upon hundreds of dollars for. Thank goodness, because it is a killer single. Anybody that likes the more aggressive side of the new wave of British heavy metal is absolutely going to love the JJ's Powerhouse outing. There was an album put out in the early 2000s that I frankly don't know much about. It's got a cover that's a direct ripoff of Deep Purple's In Rock album cover. It's kind of weird. It has the 2 songs from the single on it, and I'm guessing the other tracks are newer ones. I don't see anything on any of the liner notes looking it up online that indicates the other songs were older. I know Quad had recorded some other demo tracks here and there at least, but I don't think it's older material, and I've never checked out the album. There was also an EP that just has the 2 tracks from the single and 1 other song on it. Don't know what's up with that either. And those came out in the early 2000s, so you will see a couple of other items with the name JJ's Powerhouse on them if you dig around. All right, so 3 down, 1 to go, and last up is arguably my favorite new wave of British heavy metal single of all time. And it's a later one from the movement. I've mentioned this single a few times in other videos. I've shown it off, but I don't think I've ever played a clip of it. So tonight, we're going to write that and give you a chance to check out a little bit of Desperados by the fabulous Charger. So let's boot this one up and give a listen to Charger. All right, Charger absolutely scorching it on Desperados. You can tell why this is one of my favorite singles, possibly my favorite single. Although don't tell Mendes Prey I said that, because they'd be in contention for that title as well. But yeah, scorching, blistering track there on Desperados. The flip side, Are You Out There? Also a really good song, although that one's a little bit more of an anthemic one. It's definitely meant to get the crowd revved up, chanting, yeah, 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 get the fists and everything going a bit. Two absolutely stellar tracks. Sadly, this was about the only thing Charger ever did. They did put in an appearance on one of the Ebony compilations. It's one of the more obscure ones, and it's one of the slightly later ones. One of the issues with Charger that I've discussed before, so I'll mention it briefly here. There's no date printed on the single anywhere. And as such, people have proposed different dates for it. There was a long time where it was listed with a 1984 date on different places, including over on Metal Archives. But other people have proposed that it came out more around 1987. And that's based on the fact that it got reviewed in some of the British magazines around 1987. So why would they have been reviewing a 1984 single and not publish the review for 2 to 3 years? Yeah, that doesn't make much sense. Also, one of the members, Colin there in the center, was in the band Darkheart until at least mid-late 1985 as a full-time member. So it seems a bit, it's possible he was doing both bands at once, but it seems more likely that after Darkheart folded up, he joined up with a new crew and got more involved in the Charger project. So yeah, I've always felt that it was a pretty strong case for the 1987 date on this single as opposed to the 1984 date. The 1984 date, of course, sounds more attractive to collectors and dealers because that's kind of, the end of the golden age in new wave of British heavy metal. 1987 kind of puts it as an extremely late artifact, and you're kind of getting into post new wave of British heavy metal, almost European power metal territory by that stage, which is kind of cool, but means it can't be listed as, long lost new wave of British heavy metal classic when you're trying to sell it on eBay and stuff like that. Regardless of when the hell it came out, it is an absolute smoker of a single, as you heard. Great guitars, really strong vocals, extremely catchy melodies throughout both tracks. This was for a very long time the top item on my want list. I'm not sure where I first heard it. I don't recall Charger getting featured on one of the new wave of British heavy metal volume bootleg CDs. I may be drawing a blank, and maybe they did have one of the two songs on there, but I don't think so. If memory serves me, and it's late, and I'm tired, and it's cold outside, and it's been a long day, so maybe the memory is not working. But I think I first heard the single on a CDR comp that Terry Hanchin made for me. He was a big collector of new wave of British heavy metal. He played in the band Boulder, And he sent me a couple of CDRs back in, let's see, probably earliest 2000s of some of the really rare singles so that I could check them out. It's really nice of him. And, it worked out to his advantage too, because a few years later, when he sold off most of his collection, I ended up buying a decent chunk of stuff from him. I had been working a couple of jobs at the time, was kind of in between, hadn't gone back to work on my doctorate yet. And so I actually had some money. And when Terry contacted me, he was like, hey, I'm selling some of these. Are you interested? I'm just like, why, yes. Yes, I am. But I did not get the Charger single from him. I ended up getting the Charger single when another big time collector, Jim Cranford, sold his collection off back in the mid and late 2000s. Jim was tied to the OPM Records label. He worked with them some, and he was a big seller on eBay. He had the username Rattlehead14, and people followed his auctions religiously because when he started selling his collection, it was one of the largest collections anywhere in the world. There are probably a couple of people that had more stuff than Jim, but not many. I'm sure you could have counted them on one hand, maybe on just a couple of fingers. Jim was always very, very nice. I've communicated with him for years. He's always been very friendly, very helpful, willing to answer questions and such. And, when he sold his stuff off, most of it brought top dollar and then some. I was back in school by that time, didn't have a lot of money to work with. I was able to get a few things here and there as he auctioned his stuff off. And it took him years, literally, to go through his collection, selling a handful or two of items every single week, week in and week out for several years. But the Charger single is one that I did get. So yeah, this was Jim's copy of Charger. It was not necessarily cheap, but hey, I was already in poor college student mode. So, downgrading from ramen noodles to cat food for a couple of months, I got my Charger single, and my coat was like, nice and glossy and soft. And yeah, whatever else pet food does to cats or people who eat it. Just saying. So yeah, I was really, really happy to get that one. It's still a single that does not show up for sale very often. And yeah, it's not every day you get to knock the top thing off of your want list. So it was really cool to get it that way. As with most of the items in Jim's collection, the condition is immaculate. And I've held on to it. It'll be one of the last things I ever let go of if I should sell my stuff off one day. All right, that is going to do it. I've rambled on long enough. You have heard 4 great slices of new wave of British heavy metal. Now let's talk metal in the comments down below. What other great top-notch new wave of British heavy metal singles are there out there that I haven't touched base on yet? There's always something new to discover. I know a lot of this genre. I have not heard them all. I'm sure there are some folks out there who know about. That would be a complete mystery to me, and I'd love to hear about them. So leave a comment down below. What did you think of these 4? If there's anything that really caught your ear, let me know. It'll help me pick out songs for the next time I dig into the new wave of British heavy metal boxes and make another video featuring some of the best from one of the best periods of heavy metal history. And with that, I am going to sign off. Until next time, everybody stay safe, and as always, keep banging your heads.